There is a place on Earth where there is almost no air, where the body slowly dies, even if you are just lying still. Climbers call it the death zone. Today, I will tell you about a couple who spent 5 consecutive nights there, without oxygen, without a tent, at the very edge of human capabilities. About the love that pushed them there, and about the price they had to pay. This happened in 1991. The Soviet Union had just ceased to exist, and climbers who had previously mainly stormed the so-called intra-Union mountains, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, the Caucasus, rushed en masse to conquer the Himalayan 8,000ers. At that time, the base camps were crowded with the strongest climbers from the former USSR. It was in one of these camps, located at the foot of the 8,000er Cho-Oyu, that Francis Di Stefano, an American climber, met one of the best Soviet climbers, Sergei Arsentiev. He invited her to join an expedition to Nanga Parbat, and she agreed. Feelings quickly ignited between the two mountain conquerors, culminating in their wedding in 1992. They were bound not only by mutual affection, but also by a shared passion for the heights. Together, they completed a huge number of ascents in the Pamirs, Tian Shan, Caucasus, and the Himalayan region. They were truly outstanding athletes. They actively practiced mountaineering and conquered one peak after another, including the first ascent of an unnamed 5,800-meter mountain in the Pamirs, which they named the Peak of Goodwill. Frances was in no way inferior to her husband. She was the first American woman to ski down from Elbrus. And now we come to the key part of our story. The year was 1998. Sergei and Frances decided to conquer Everest. But this was not about a simple ascent. That would not have been a world achievement. They planned to achieve the first female oxygen-less summit. Frances was to become the first female to climb the highest point on the planet without oxygen equipment. Is it necessary to explain how risky this was? Every 6th male oxygenless attempt ends in the climber's death, and at that time, there had been no successful female cases at all. Despite all the risks, on May 19th, the climbers were already at the incredible altitude of 8,200 meters, where they set up their assault camp, from which they planned to push for the summit. This is what was reported to base camp. Sergei Arsentiev and Francis Di Stefano Arsentiev have ascended to 8,200. Radio communication between all teams on the route and the base camp is stable. Arsentiev reports via radio that their condition is normal and they intend to set off at 1 o'clock in the morning on May 20th. One must understand that an altitude of 8,200 meters is already the so-called death zone, where a minimum of air enters the lungs. And no matter how comfortable the conditions, you are still gradually fading. Even if you are just lying in a tent in a warm sleeping bag and not moving, the lack of oxygen slowly drains your strength, and physical recovery is impossible. You are literally walking slowly towards your demise. It is for this reason that climbers call altitudes above 8,000 meters the death zone. But despite all this, having successfully spent the night at 8,200, Sergei and Francis make a summit attempt in the morning. They set off right on schedule and were moving quite confidently. However, at a certain point, the batteries in their headlamps froze, and the climbers deemed it unsafe to continue the ascent in the dark. They decide to return to the camp at 8,200 meters to repeat the summit attempt later. This is what was transmitted to base camp. After spending the night at an altitude of 8,200, Sergei Arsentiev and Francis Di Stefano Arsentiev attempted to summit the peak. Upon reaching the rocks of the first step, they were forced to return to their tents. Anatoly Moshnikov, who had ascended to 8,200 around 3 o'clock in the afternoon for his own summit attempt, saw Sergei and Francis descending along the ridge. The climber from the Russian team, Anatoly Moshnikov, arrived at the camp at 8,200 meters at 1,500 and saw Francis and Sergei descending along the ridge. According to his observations, Sergei was walking energetically and did not look exhausted, unlike the woman. She was noticeably lagging and, according to Anatoly, arrived at the camp 30 minutes after her husband, after which she got into the tent and did not come out again. It was evident that oxygen deprivation was already seriously affecting Francie's body during that first attempt. Sergei Arsentia descended to his tent and immediately headed for Moshnikov's tent, which was located 70 meters away. Sergei explained that they had left from 8,200 meters only at 6:30 in the morning, not at 1 o'clock as planned. For unclear reasons, all their batteries had died, even though Francie's had 2 spare headlamps. Anatoly Moshnikov, who met Sergei, was a close friend and a commercial guide leading a French client up Everest. He gives Sergei batteries and suggests they set out for the ascent together the next morning. And so they did. In the morning, Arsentiev, Francis, Moshnikov, and his French client, Roman Gilles, set out to storm the summit. However, after just 100 meters, Sergei realized that Francis was moving too slowly. Clearly, the lack of oxygen was taking its toll. She had only covered about 50 meters. Their team was forced to return to the camp at 8,200 meters. Meanwhile, Moshnikov safely guided his client to the summit of Everest, and on May 21st was already descending back to the camp at 8,200 meters, where Sergei and his wife were still staying. Reaching their tents, Moshnikov tried to talk them out of the ascent and suggested they descend together the next morning. One must understand that climbing Everest is an incredibly expensive undertaking. It costs tens of thousands of dollars, and climbers almost always seek sponsors for it and have certain obligations to them. The costs are not only financial, but also physical. Climbers prepare for this ascent for years. And not every mountain conqueror is capable of abandoning their ambitions, giving up on their dream, losing tens of thousands of dollars, letting down sponsors, and descending with nothing to show for it. Therefore, on May 22nd, after 3 nights in the death zone without oxygen, they made a 3rd summit attempt. The exact time of their departure from 8,200 meters is unknown, but it was early. According to some reports, it happened between 2 and 3 in the morning. From base camp, Anatoly Shabanov, the leader of the Uzbek expedition, was watching them through a 60-power telescope. During the 10 o'clock radio call with Moshnikov, he reported seeing the pair near the first step. At 1,400, they were seen above the rocks of the second step, an altitude of 8,700 meters. Rustam Rajapov, a member of the Uzbek expedition who had started his ascent at 8 in the morning, overtook them before the end of the day at an altitude of 8,800 meters. According to him, Francis was moving extremely slowly and often sat down to rest. Evidently, on the 3rd day without oxygen, her body was exhausted. At 1640, Rustam Rajapov reached the summit of Everest and began his descent. On the way down, he met Sergei and Francis again. He realized that the group's pace was extremely slow, and they would not make it down before dark. He tried to talk Sergei out of it and urged them to descend with him, pointing out that Francis's pace had slowed even more. Rustam Rajapov even climbed 50 meters back up towards the summit with them, an incredible feat for someone who had just completed such an ascent. He urged them to turn back, but Sergei said not to worry about them, as they had a cache below between the first and second steps, which, according to him, contained oxygen cylinders, a tent, and warm clothes. Rajapov believed Arsentiev that he had everything for a safe night, left them, and continued his descent. But at an altitude of 8,630 meters, he found this cache. According to him, it was a small, half-empty backpack and a half-empty oxygen cylinder. There was no tent and no warm clothes there. But one way or another, Sergei and Francis Di Stefano did reach the summit of Everest at 1830 and began their descent. Francis became the first woman to summit Everest without oxygen. But there was no time to celebrate. Darkness was falling fast, and a cold night bivouac awaited them. Most likely, they managed to descend to their cache, but there was no tent, no sleeping bags, and not enough warm clothing. We can only guess what happened during the night. Evidently, the bivouac at 8,600 meters was simply terrible. And after the fourth night at an altitude above 8,000 meters, they began their descent in the morning. But whether due to bad weather or general exhaustion, they lost sight of each other. Their groups separated. On the morning of May 23rd, a group of Uzbek climbers consisting of Oleg Grigoriev, Andrei Fyodorov, Sergei Sokolov, Svetlana Baskakova, and Marat Usayev set out for their ascent. At 8,450 meters, they met Sergei Arsentiev, who asked, "Where is my wife? Hasn't she descended?" They answered no. Without saying anything, Arsentiev began to descend towards the tents, and they continued their ascent. Climbing higher, the climbers saw Francis. It was about 100 meters below their presumed bivouac site, at an altitude of 8,550 meters. She was standing and leaning against a rock in a semi-conscious state. She was not wearing a harness. Her safety line was clipped to her jacket zipper. The team of Uzbek climbers, effectively risking their own ascent, began to help Francis. They contacted base camp and called for a doctor. The doctor recommended several tablets of Trental and oxygen, with the valve turned on full at a flow rate of 4 liters per minute. But the woman kept tearing off the mask and muttering something. This is what the Uzbek group reported. Her legs were not working. That is, she could not descend on her own. Result of the examination: pupils dilated, gaze fixed, fingers frostbitten, white. After seating her, they massaged her hands and feet. At 11 in the morning, there was radio contact with the groups at 7,700 and 7,100 meters. Moshnikov was at 7,100 and recommended bringing Francis down. At 11:40, the group leader, Grigoriev, decided that Sokolov, Baskakova, and Usayev would continue the ascent, while he and Fyodorov would stay with Francis. At 1300, Fyodorov also set out for the summit, climbing without oxygen because his mask and oxygen cylinder remained with Francis. Grigoriev left Francis at 1330 and also moved towards the summit. Before leaving, he secured Francis to the fixed ropes and fastened her oxygen mask. 100 meters higher, at 8,630, he found the Arsentiev's cache site, where there was a half-empty backpack, an empty oxygen cylinder, a mask with a regulator, a flashlight, and a flask. The Uzbek group successfully completed the ascent and began their descent. On the way back, they planned to evacuate Francis. But among the 5 of them, they had only 10 oxygen cylinders, the lion's share of which had already been given to the victim. And by remaining at such an altitude without oxygen, the Uzbek team themselves risked being left on Everest forever. By this point, Fyodorov and Usayev, who had given her their oxygen, were feeling unwell on the descent. However, they attempted to bring the American woman down. They managed to drag her down 100 meters, but the group itself was on the verge of death. The leader decided not to risk his people and told them to descend, while Grigoriev himself stayed with Francis. By this time, the woman was periodically racked by convulsions. Grigoriev sat with her until 20 o'clock and realized that he would most likely not survive a cold night bivouac. He left her and descended. Grigoriev secured Francis, connected the last oxygen cylinder, adjusted her mittens, hat, and hood, and began his descent. To his surprise, during his descent, he encountered a climber moving upwards. What madman decided to storm Everest at night? Drawing level with him, Grigoriev recognized him as Arsentiev, who had descended to the tents, taken an oxygen cylinder, and, on some unknown strength, was now storming Everest for a second time, where his wife remained. When the exhausted climbers drew level, Arsentiev asked, "Where is Francis?" Grigoriev replied, "She is still alive." This was Sergei and Francis's fifth night at an altitude well above 8,000 meters and practically without oxygen. Moreover, it was their second night without a tent. Meanwhile, the climbers from the Uzbek team, who had already safely descended to the camp at 8,200, tried to persuade some of the Sherpas to go up to help the victims, promising a great deal of money. But none of them agreed to take such a risk. No one ever saw Sergei Arsentiev again. On May 24th, members of the Uzbek team made an attempt to rescue their comrades. Tukvatulin Ilyas, Zaikin Andrei, and Dokukin Alexei set out for the place where they had left Francis. But climbers Ian Woodall and Kathy O'Dowd, along with 4 Sherpas from a South African expedition, 6 people in total, were already next to her. They had set out to summit Everest that day. Amazingly, on the 5th day at such an altitude, Francis was still alive. She kept repeating, "Help, help." Her arms were out of her sleeves, under her down jacket, without mittens. Her hat was off. The oxygen mask was also off and tied by its cord to the fixed rope. The oxygen cylinder was disconnected. Francis herself was tied to the end of a fixed rope. A little lower on the trail, 50 meters from her on the ridge, Sergei's ice axe and rope were found. It is likely that he did reach his wife and spent that night beside her. But neither Sergei himself nor his body were anywhere to be seen. The climbers from South Africa gave Francis tea, massaged her legs, and confirmed that she could not descend on her own. Tukvatulin suggested giving her an adrenaline shot and had even warmed the ampule, but it quickly became obvious to everyone that this would no longer help her. Then, after conferring among themselves, the South Africans, without saying a word, turned around and went down. They abandoned their ascent. Kathy O'Dowd cried the whole way. Evidently, this encounter in the mountains turned her life upside down. Here is how the young woman recalls these events. "I stared at the body, blinking in disbelief. We were in the shadow of the first step, so the light was dim. The body lay about 10 meters from where I stood, angled away from me. It twitched, a horrible movement, like a puppet being violently jerked by its strings. We were on a well-organized and so far successful push for the summit of Everest, concerned only with ourselves. Now, a stranger lay in our path, moaning and dying. A Sherpa shouted at me not to look and waved me on, telling me to follow him up the step. I looked back at the twitching figure. We stood there, hesitant to move. Money, time, thousands of meters of physical and mental effort. We had sponsors who expected us to make it to the top. We had personal ambitions that pointed in the same direction. We were only 240 meters from the summit, just 4 or 5 hours away. We were so close. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't place the summit of a mountain above a human life. However hopeless this person's situation was, I had to try to help. And I shouted to the Sherpas, "This body is alive. I'm going to check." It took them a while to understand what I was talking about. "We can't just leave," I insisted. "I thought it might be someone from the Russian team." The person was lying with their harness clipped to the rope, face up, head and legs hanging on either side. I carefully knelt beside the body and saw it was a woman. "Don't leave me," she said. Her skin was milky white and perfectly smooth. It was a sign of severe frostbite, and it made her look like a porcelain doll. Her eyes looked at me, unfocused. Her pupils were huge, dark, and empty. "Don't leave me," she mumbled. I was stunned. With her long, dark hair, she looked like me, and for a second, I thought I was seeing my own future. The fact that she was conscious was both encouraging and terrifying. Maybe we could save her, or maybe we would have to leave her. "I need to go and get the rest of the team," I told her. "We have a few people here. We will try to help you. I'll be back, I promise." "Why are you doing this to me?" she moaned. The Sherpas, disappointed, started to descend. The woman had no visible injuries. She was as helpless as a rag doll. Next to her was an orange, Russian-made oxygen cylinder and a mask. We had no way to give her oxygen. Her mask wouldn't fit our cylinders. We had spare cylinders, but no spare masks. For oxygen to have any effect, you'd need to set a high flow rate and stay there for several hours, and that meant one of us would have to go without oxygen. 3 Uzbek climbers were approaching. "Will you help us?" I asked one. "This woman is dying. We could get her down. Will you help?" The leader of the 3 looked down at me reluctantly. "We tried to help yesterday. We left oxygen. She is too far gone to be helped." We stayed with Francis for almost an hour, standing still in temperatures of around -30°C, sitting in a precarious position on a steep, unstable slope. I began to get very cold. My fingers were almost completely numb. Shivers ran through my whole body, and my teeth chattered under my oxygen mask. The decision to leave Francis came to us without much discussion. The Uzbek climbers and the Sherpas had long held this view. I had never encountered anything like it. I had walked past bodies. I had friends who didn't come back, but I had never seen someone die. And I was not supposed to abandon them. And they were the last ones to see Francis alive. But Ian Woodall and Cathy O'Dowd made a promise to themselves that one day they would return to Everest and bury Francis. For 8 long years, her body lay on the world's highest peak. She was not alone there. Many climbers remain lying where life left them. At such an altitude, bringing bodies down is practically impossible, so the path to Everest is strewn with their bodies. They become landmarks of a sort, and a reminder that death walks very close. The bodies of climbers do not decompose due to the low temperatures. They are often given nicknames. Thus, climbers nicknamed Francis's body Sleeping Beauty, and for a long time, she served as a landmark on the ascent. However, Ian Woodall and Cathy O'Dowd kept their promise. In 2007, they organized a new expedition to bury the body of Francis Arsentiev and an unidentified climber nicknamed Green Boots, both of whom had become famous Everest landmarks. But they were unable to bring her body down from the summit. It is too difficult a task. They moved Francis to a less conspicuous location, covered her body with an American flag, and took some of her equipment to give to her relatives. The mysterious disappearance of her husband, Sergei Arsentiev, was solved much earlier. when Jake Norton, a member of the 1999 expedition to find the bodies of Mallory and Irvine, discovered Sergei's body slightly lower down the mountain slope. Apparently, he had fallen from approximately the same place where his wife was left. This is one of the saddest stories of love, and the love for mountains, which became fatal for them. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to give it a like. Write what you think about this story in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already.